some sort of have used a CSS preprocessor like less. Okay. And what about Bootstrap? Has anybody done anything with Bootstrap? Okay. Good. Okay. Cool. Right. Well, let's get started then. So tonight I am going to talk about CSS preprocessors and explain what they are. We're going to spend most of the evening, or the first part of the evening, talking about less, which is the preprocessor that I know and the one that is included within Bootstrap. Then we'll look at Bootstrap. And as part of that, we'll look at responsive design. So the last part of the evening is going to be sort of flitting between these two. But that's about it. So I'll get started. So CSS preprocessors. Well, there's a number of them, and let's first explain what they are. A preprocessor is a scripting language generally that you can use to generate CSS. So it's kind of programmatically generating your CSS for you. I'll go into what that means in a minute, but it does mean it's kind of an extra step or another layer in your development, but it can speed things up. So anyway, we've got a number available. There's less. Sass is another one which is fairly popular. Compass, which is related to Sass, right?
Yeah, that is a preprocessor, but it uses Sass.
Okay. So I've not really used any of the others, but I've just sort of thrown a few up here because I thought we should make everybody aware that there are alternatives out there. But less does seem to be, Twitter are standardising on this, so kind of follow the big guys, I guess. So yeah, preprocessors, the language that you write in that the browser can't directly understand, so you'll need to run it through I've jumped ahead of myself. Sorry. Okay, so what is less? Less is it's a superset of CSS, which means that any valid CSS is also valid less. So anything you write in CSS, you can write in less, and it's completely valid. What less adds to CSS is variables. Right, so I call them variables. They're really constants, but you can declare something and reuse it. There are mixins, which it's a CSS class that you can inherit into other classes. We'll look at those in a minute. Nested rules is part of the less syntax, which we'll cover later. And functions and operators, which are quite powerful when it comes to actually generating your CSS. So we need, as I say, less can't be understood by browsers. So we need a way of generating some CSS from your less, which your browser can then use. So there's a number of ways of doing that. If you go to the less CSS.org website, there's a little button that says download less.js, which is a JavaScript file which you can stick in the head of your browser. And you can link directly to your less file, and the JavaScript will interpret the less and turn it into CSS for you, which is okay for development, but really, if you're going to deploy it, don't do that. It's going to slow things down. It's just not a good idea. There are some server-side options, so if you're running PHP or .NET, Ruby on Rails, there are things you can run on your server which will take a less file that you deploy to your server and convert that into CSS on the fly for you, which could be useful in certain situations, but most of the time compiling your CSS as you go along is probably the way to go. So we'll have a look at the compilers very quickly in a minute, but on Windows, the main one is called WinLess. And on the Mac, we've got less.app and CodeKit. So let's have a quick look at those, and we'll see how they work. Where's my mouse? There it is. Okay. Okay, so first of all, this is the Less website. As you can see, there's a big download Less.js button there, and they show you how to stick that in your head and use that in a page. As I say, it's fine for development, but there are better ways of doing it, so we'll look at that. WinLess. So basically, WinLess and less.app look very similar. You've just got a panel on the left-hand side and your files on the right. And what you do is you drag a folder into the app that contains that, to then watch that folder, and every time you save your less file, it compiles it into CSS for you and puts it in the CSS folder. So here we go, this is less.app, and as you can see, it looks very similar. Folders on the left-hand side, files here. And finally, we'll just have a quick look at CodeKit, because that's the one I'm going to be using this evening. Now, CodeKit, I think I'm right in saying that WinLess and less.app are both free. CodeKit isn't, but it doesn't just do, there is a free trial, and I recommend you have a look at it, because if you're using a Mac, that's really cool. It doesn't just compile your less, it will do Sass and a lot of the other CSS preprocessors as well. But it also has JS hint built in. So JS hint, if you're not come across that one, it will, every time you save a JavaScript file, it checks your JavaScript to make sure you haven't cocked up, which 9 times out of 10 I have. So it will take, like if you've left a semicolon off the end or you've missed a curly brace or something, this will flag it up straight away for you, and it does tell you a lot of other sort of, it will give you hints on how to improve your JavaScript code as well. It will also minimise images for you, and it will reload the browser when you save an HTML file, which means that you've got one less thing to press. Which, you know, I'm lazy, I like things that happen magically. So that's compilers. So you need to make a choice which one of those you're going to use, and well, have a play with a few maybe, but if you're on a Mac, I would seriously recommend having a look at CodeKit, and as I say, we'll be using that in a minute. We've done that. Right. Okay, so variables. So anybody that's done any programming will probably know more or less what a variable is. It's something you declare and say, you know, I'm giving this name to this value. So it lets you hold on to properties such as colours or fonts, reference them once in a less file, and then you can reuse that value throughout your CSS quite easily. So if you're anything like me, when you're working on a big site, you might previously have put a load of comments at the top of the file to say, you know, this is the brand colour, and this is our alternative colour, and this is you know, a highlight colour, and then you go back to the top of the file and copy that hex value and put it back there where you need it. This basically removes that step. As long as you can remember what you called your variables, then you can just reference that directly. And if you come up with a coding standard and you're working in a team, then everybody else in the team will know, you know, what that is as well. You can also store text strings and variables, so for things like image paths, if you're doing background images.
Can you concatenate them?
Can you concatenate them? Yes, so put more than one together.
Well, because you could just do the root path and then the dot and then the file name.
Yeah, you can do
okay.
that. Yeah, so you can put a variable in front of the file name.
Okay.
So that which is quite handy. We'll come to this later, but if you're using different background images for different resolutions, then you can change the variable for the file name, but have the same file name in the back end. Anyway, so that's variables, and now I'm going to show you some code. Okay. Okay, so I can't spell variables. So here's a really exciting HTML page, completely honest here, not styled, but as you can see, we've got a couple of headings and some paragraphs. So if we look at the code here, so just a bog standard HTML file, nothing exciting going on. There's a link here to a CSS file, but if we look in the assets folder, we don't have a CSS folder at the moment. We've got, as I say, a couple of headings and some paragraphs. So if we look in the less folder, I've got a styles.less, and here are my variables. So in less, a variable starts with an at. So at container width is 750, at serif font is that, sans serif font is that, my background colour is and I have a 999 copy colour, and foo, because foo makes me laugh, as the heading colour. And then you can see here, this is just like vanilla CSS really. So we've got the colour defined, and the difference is instead of having the hash value for copy colour, or sorry, instead of using hash 999, I'm using copy colour, at copy colour. And as you can see, like the width of the container div is container width, and so on and so forth. So far, so what? It's, you know, you might think you're wasting your time setting those variables, but actually, you're gonna be quite pleased a bit later on when you've got hundreds of HTML pages and a massive, CSS file as long as you're on. So that's the basics of variables. So CodeKit. Let's bring CodeKit out. Where is CodeKit? CodeKit. Okay. Right. So here's CodeKit. Like I say, to start, drop your website folder onto this window. So that's what we're going to do in a minute, and then we'll see that some files magically appear in there. If I can find the file. Right, so I definitely can't spell variables. Anyway, ignoring the fact that I can't spell variables, we can see now that it's picked up, there are two files in there. We have styles.less and index.htm, so it's now watching those two files, and if anything changes, it will refresh the browser screen for one thing, and it will also generate my CSS if I save the less file. So let's do that. I'm quite happy with all my variables at the moment, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a space here and save that. And what you haven't just seen, because it's on this screen here, is a little notification come up from CodeKit saying success. So if we look now, come on. Okay, so if we look in the assets folder now, we've got a CSS file. Oh, it's up there, look, I didn't need to do that. So we've got a CSS file. As you can see, it's picked up all the variables, as you'd probably expect, that I set, and you don't see those in the CSS file. And hopefully, in the background, Chrome is reloaded, and there we go.
Does CodeKit reload your browser once it picks up change?
Yeah, it'll do it for Safari and Chrome, but not Firefox, because Firefox is missing some scripting capabilities that CodeKit relies on. So most browsers, but not Firefox. So that's variables. Is there any questions on that before we move on? Fairly straightforward, I think. Okay. Back to the slides. Okay, so the next thing is mixins. I'm sorry, I just got Keynote this week, so I haven't used it before, and I've gone a bit nuts with transitions. So, sorry about that. Anyway, mixins, they allow you to embed the properties of a class into another class, or another selector. That's the easiest way I can describe it, and that doesn't make an awful lot of sense until you see it, but basically, you write a CSS class as normal, and then you can basically stick that class name inside another selector, and that selector will inherit everything that you've got in that class. Mixins can also take parameters, so you can pass in brackets after the class name a parameter or a number of parameters, and that means you can produce different results with the same mixin, which is quite handy, and we'll have a look at that in a second. Oops. Go back. No. Oh, anyway. Let's have a look at mixins. I wonder if I spelled that right. Right. Okay. So. Very familiar looking web page here. So again, we've got an assets folder with a less folder in it, and nothing else. And again, we've got a styles not less. But there's a couple of things going on, one of which I didn't want just yet. So let's comment that out. Okay, so we've got this class here called round, which is a mixin, and we've got another one called .fs, which we'll look at in a minute. We'll look at round first. But there are brackets after rounds. Now, if this was a parametric mixin, we'd be declaring our parameters in there, but we're not. It isn't. So these brackets are optional, but they are quite useful because by putting those brackets in there, it means that when the less app generates less for you, it won't. Generates a CSS. This won't end up in your CSS file. So that basically hides it from the end CSS. So these rules here will only apply when you put .round inside something. So hopefully, if I've done this right, we should have down here. Yeah, .round. Okay, so if I uncomment this now. Okay, so at the moment we've got a heading colour which is going to be foo, red, and a background colour which is white. So if I put what this mixin here does is add rounded corners. If I put rounded corners on a white background, you're not going to see that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make colour background colour, and background colour will be colour. So now we're going to have white text on a red background, and nothing happened. Ah, because CodeKit, I haven't added it to CodeKit. In fact, what I think I'll do is I'm just going to add everything to that, so that doesn't happen again. Okay. Right, so I can click on that and I can compile it directly from there. And now we should have really rounded corners. It's not very clear on the predictor. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a simple non-parameter driven mixin. Anything that we apply that class to will get 5 pixels rounded corners.
Could you think of a mix as an extended variable?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's a variable. It's a class. So it's essentially it's a variable, but it's you can have as much as you can fit into a class in the mixin. Now, one of the advantages of using mixins for stuff like this is that border radiuses and box shadows and things like that are a bit of a pain at the moment because we still have to use vendor prefixes for a lot of the newer browsers. Thanks, Cora. It would be really nice if we could just type border radius once and be done with it, but we can't. So, without having to remember all your vendor prefixes, if you stick them into a mixin, you can just use that everywhere. So we'll have a quick look at this one. This is a parametric mixin, and what this does is, so .fs is for font sizing. What we're doing here is we are declaring, this is like a default font size, so 12 pixels. Then we've got base and base font size. So what we do, we pass a variable in fact we pass two, pixels, which is our target pixel size, and base, which is whatever the pixel value of the fonts in the parent element are. So, browser default, generally, anybody know what the browser default for font size is?
16.
Thank you. So 16 pixels is the standard browser font size, and in the past we've done stuff like, at the root level we've divided that by 67% or something to give us a 10 pixel base font size, and then use dems from there to calculate pixel font sizes. What this allows you to do is, as long as you know what the parent font size is, then you can get whatever font size out that you want. So by saying .fs 1216, if I know the parent is 16 pixels, then I'll get 12 pixels out. Have I done it? No. So let's do that on here. Let's do something like .fs. So let's say we want 32 pixels, just so it's nice and big for people. At the back, 16, and that's that. So that works. Woo! So there we go. We've got a nice big font size there now. And if I look at the CSS, you'll see what it's done. Hopefully, is we go. Font size. Is that better? 200 pixels. Sorry, I can't scroll that up anymore. But so that's what's been generated as font size 200 pixels, and that would apply anywhere else. So it's quite a nice little hit into it. It's quicker than using mcalc or something like that for working out m values for pixels, for pixel sizes. So those are a couple of mixins. One I wrote, one I've stolen from somebody else. The nice thing is that some other people have kindly put together some libraries. There's one called less elements, which is just a less file, which you can just download using this download link. And if you save that into your folder like I have here, elements.less, you will find that there are a bunch of quite handy predefined mixins in here, which you can then use in your code. So I've got, I was going to give you an example of that, but I think you probably get the idea. I can show you adding a gradient to the background, but actually looking at time, I think I'll leave that. But that's worth having a look at if you do decide to look at less in a bit more detail. Okay. Right, so nested rules. Lets you nest selectors one inside the other. It's a sort of syntactical nicety, I guess, in a way. It lets you, basically, you can nest stuff inside the curly braces of other selectors, and your compiler will figure out the specificity for you and build the rules so that when you, oops, was that it? So yeah, the only downside to the nested, it can be nice for sort of shorthand, but it can also cause you pain down the line when it comes to debugging, because you know what you're seeing in your less is not what you're getting in the CSS, so it might not be the best thing to do. But we'll look at that. I can show you an example of some nested.
In terms of debugging, though, do you get, if you did something wrong, would you get like a debug message within?
So if you screw your less up, you get a. I'll let me do that in a minute. I'll show you. But yeah, code kit basically goes no. But if you you haven't messed your less up, it's perfectly valid, but it's still breaking something in your HTML and your CSS.
Yeah, sure.
Then it can be a bit tricky to sort out the specificity. So, you know, if you're nesting 16 things deep, then you're asking for trouble. Basically, it's nice for shorthand sometimes, but not.
I've heard it's a rule of thumb if you go 4 levels deep.
Yeah.
That's as far as you want to go, really.
That's what I've heard as well. So yeah. So people say. Right. So functions and operators. Now I have to admit, this is an area that I'm less au fait with. I've done quite a bit with mixins and stuff like that, but not so much with this stuff, mainly because I'm not a big fan of JavaScript, and as you can see from there, functions map one-to-one to JavaScript code, which means that you can manipulate your CSS with JavaScript style scripting. So if you're a JavaScript guru, then this might really get you hot, but it doesn't really float my boat too much. Operators, though, can be quite handy. Operators are like mathematical functions that you can do on your less. So they let you add, subtract, divide, multiply stuff. So, for example, properties, values, and colours. So I've got an example of that to show you. For an experiment, I thought I'd have a look at something that Andy Clark has done, which is to generate a colour, colour theme from one hex value. So here's my HTML file. Has anybody got a favourite hex value? Come on, somebody must have. Anybody? James? No, don't say 0, 0, 0, 0.
0, 0, 0.
Foo. Right. Okay, let's have a look at that in a minute. So what we've got here, let's have a quick look at the HTML file first of all. Okay. So like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to create a colour palette. Our main colour is going to be here, and then we're going to have a complementary colour and lighter and darker colours as we go down the page. It's really exciting.
Look up Daring Fireball's colour. It's probably the most famous hex value.
Okay. Browser. Daring.
That one? Yeah. You can even get it on a t-shirt.
Okay.
Right. Great.
That's something we mostly
Put it to test.
Okay, well, I think we might go with the...
Do an orange then, F90.
Okay, right, we'll do that. So let's just have a look at the code quickly first of all and see whether we can work out what's going on here. So we've got a less file, and it's basically the same as the right place. Yeah, so this is pretty much the same as the other less files. The only difference here is that we've got a container width which I've set to 800 pixels, and a swatch margin of 10 pixels, and a swatch size which is container width divided by 4 minus 10. So what are we doing there? We are taking 800, dividing it by 4 to get 200, and then taking 10 off for the margin. Which, if we go down to here, come back to that in a minute. In fact, so that's our variables. Okay, so now here we have a nested nested selectors. So I've got a UL, and inside, I haven't closed this bracket, inside there I've got a dot list reset, which is my mixin, which is up here somewhere. And what that does is it sets everything to display block, float left, list style none, margin 0, padding 0. So it's going to take a lot of the default styling off and float everything left to give us some squares, which we'll see in a minute. So the div is set to contain a width, which is 800, margin auto just to keep them nice in the middle of the screen. Yeah, copy color, all that stuff we had before. So nested selectors. So the UL is going to inherit that list reset class that we've got up the top there and float left and lose all its margins and everything. The last child, so Li is going to inherit that as well. The height and width are going to be set to swatch size, so we have a nice square. Maybe I should run this and then go through the code, that might be better. Let's do that. So, what I need to do is down here, this is where the colour goes. So what did we say, F9?
F90.
F90. Okay, so let's save that. Hopefully I've got the CSS file, I have. And, ooh, right. Okay, so here's F90. And somehow we've generated a blue colour. So how's that happened? No, it meant to do that. So let's have a look and see how that happens. So we've got our colour defined here, F90, and then comp. Now comp is the complementary colour, and what we've done, we've spun col 180 degrees. So round the colour wheel 180 degrees to get the blue. Follow so far?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Then what we do is we take col and we lighten it 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, and darken it 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. And then the same with comp.
Excuse me, do you know if that adds white and black just to lighten and darken, or is it just something clever?
I think it's, well, we can have a look at the output in a minute, but I think it's doing some clever maths nonsense. And then down here we've got the classes that I've assigned to the less. So literally each one of these maps to a variable, and that's the background colour for the list item. So each list item, like we said up here, has the height and width of the swatch size, which is, what did I say, 190 pixels. Margin right is swatch margin, and the background colour. If we hadn't done anything, they'd all be orange, but because we've done magical jiggery pokery further down, they've all got different background colours now. So we've got our original colour, our complementary colour, our lighten colours, and then our complementary colours afterwards. So it's quite a nice way of quickly generating colours for use in the site. And yeah, without using paint. Yeah. So
If I come out of the Daring 5 one, we've ended up with 50 Shades of Grey.
I've got no idea what you're talking about. So that's operations.
Are they then assigned to variables?
Yeah,
So you assign them to new.
Yeah, so
20% lighter.
yeah, so here's a variable called colour1 lighten 1 or L1
Right.
for lighten.
Sure.
And then down here I've got a class that directly maps to that.
Cool.
And then that's assigned to the first list item on the second row. Okay?
Yeah.
Any questions? Okay. Where are we? Exciting. So in a nutshell, that's less. So it's variables, mix-ins, which are variables, which are classes, nested rules, functions and operators.
And can you ask, when you output your CSS, can you output 8 different compression sizes?
Yeah, you can. So, sorry, I was going to show you. Let's just before we move on then. So, so let's bring up CodeKit. So I've got my style.less here, which you can see it's going to output to assets styles. You can change where that's going, but that's like the default location for it. You can get to run less, which is some sort of CSS validator. It will enforce strict imports. That's something I should have mentioned. Is that, well, I'll show you in a minute with Bootstrap. Output style, you've got regular, minified, and YUI compression. And you also got don't compile directly, which is because on a lot of stuff you're going to be importing less files into other files, and you don't want them to try and compile straight away, because the variables will be stored somewhere else and then it will crap its pants.
Is it possible to put comments into your less file?
Yeah,
that
so
do not appear in your CSS.
yeah, so if you do a single line,
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
that won't show up. If I do a where's my what's my slash there? If I do multi-line style comment,
That will show up.
oh, well, yeah. So should have stayed in sublime text. Ooh, it's exciting. Here we go. So somewhere down here, if I'm in the right project, which I'm not. Somewhere. Yeah, there we go. Boom. So the other comment isn't there. So single line comments don't appear, multi-line ones do. And in answer to your question about how it lightens and darkens scenes, I can't really tell from that, but it looks like it's doing maths to me.
Was that a CodeKit thing, or was that a less thing, the whole single line quoting?
I think it's less
Right, okay.
standard. Yeah.
I think SAS does that as well.
Right.
Okay. So just before we move on to the next thing, which is Bootstrap, let's try and break something and see what happens with CodeKit. Let's see. Oh, well, I can't break it from the CSS for a start. That will probably do it. Yeah. So you get a parser error, and most of the sorry guys, I can't get that up any higher, but basically it says it went wrong with this line, and it doesn't give you much more to clue than that, but at least you know where to look. Okay. Right. So Twitter Bootstrap, how many people have used it? 2, 3? Okay, so what's in it? What is Twitter Bootstrap? It's a framework developed in-house at Twitter, which is used for developing websites. It requires the HTML5 doc type because it makes use of some new HTML5 elements. It has a reset via normalize.css, so a lot of times when you do a reset style sheet, you basically remove all the styling from everything and start from scratch and then start adding things back in again. What normalize does is it keeps the good bits from each browser and then builds up from there. You get base styles for typography and links. You get a 12-column grid. You get fundamental HTML elements styled to enhance with extensible classes. I've nicked this from their website. You get dozens of reusable components built to provide navigation alerts, popovers, and more. And 13 custom jQuery plugins. I do know that they have also got, or somebody's actually taken the jQuery and rewritten it as MooTools. So if you're a MooTools developer, then there is a flavour for you as well that you can download. So when I started doing my talk, preparing for it, I did a mind map, and this is a small part of it. And I started going through the Bootstrap site and going, right, I want to talk about that and that and that and that and that. And I basically went, oh God, I'm going to be there all night. So what I decided to do is, rather than sort of me stand up here and talk at you, we'll actually look quickly at the Bootstrap website and get an idea of what's in the framework. So we'll do that, and then we'll move on to some more demos. So we should stop doing that. Okay, so there's an interesting thing. Yeah, this could cause us a bit of an issue because we're using a projector. It's actually gone into like the sort of mobile mode. So normally you'd have navigation across the top there, but because the screen's quite narrow, it's hidden that. So we might find that happens with all the demos, which could be a bit of a problem. But anyway, so here's the navigation.
That's a general issue with responsive design.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we go with the Bootstrap site. Now, one thing to point out is that in the past, when I've downloaded Bootstrap, I found that clicking this button gives you everything, but no less files. So you get the CSS, but no less. So if you want to use less, don't do that. Go to GitHub and clone it, or grab it from there. I'm gonna. Right. I'm just going to look at this because my notes are in the slide. Okay, so let's have a look and see what we so we'll start with scaffolding. There we go. So we've got some global settings. As I say, it requires the HTML5 doc type, and it starts off by set by normalize and a grid. Now we'll look at the grid in a minute when we come to demonstrating some pages, but essentially you've got 12 columns, and everything could be one column wide, or it could be any combination to give you a nicely structured page. Here we go. So we have rows and spans. So if you have a class of span 4, then it's going to be 4 columns wide. If it's 8, then it'll be 8 wide. And you can offset, push and pull, nest columns, all that malarkey. Not very interesting at this stage. You can also have a fixed layout. So if you're not wanting to build a responsive site, then do that. And you'll have a fixed site like you normally would.
The columns is quite handy when you've got a designer who's designed to a grid.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where it is very
Yeah.
handy.
So we've got base CSS, which gives you some nice sort of fairly standard rules for headings and copy and stuff like that. I mean, standard stuff that you'd normally go through and set up yourself when starting a site. They've also got some stuff that I'm not sure I use all that often, but addresses are nicely formatted, and block quotes and stuff like that. If we look at tables, they've got some reasonably nice default table styling. You can add zebra striping really quite easily, which we use Untitled to go and style your table, and you've got all sorts of fancy pants borders and stuff that you can add on. But that's not really the exciting stuff. I quite like the form styling stuff I've done, because forms can be a bit of a pain to make look pretty. So they've got some nice new sort of takes on some of this stuff. Inline forms are all already sorted out for you, horizontal forms. And then we've got stuff like, yeah, I've done all the checklog stuff for you as well. Anybody that's done any forms in the past, and getting them to line up nicely can be a bit of a fact. What I was looking for is this stuff here. So quite often designers will put things like, decimal points after an input, so that the user doesn't type that in, it's already there for them. This is just in a span, so it's not actually submitted back to the server, or an app for a username in front, and there's a bit of placeholder text here and that sort of thing. You can have them before and after, so on and so on. So that's all quite nice. We've got buttons. quite handy. So they've got default button styles. They've got a bunch of classes for various states, and then you can have large button, default button, small button. So the way, this is one of the things that I'm a bit conflicted about with Boot Camp, Basecamp, is because if you want to get a big button and you want it to be blue, then you're probably going to end up using 3 class names for it, which I don't really like, but I guess with a framework, you know, there's no other way around it, otherwise you're going to end up rewriting all that code. So it's kind of a trade-off between nice, non-presentational class names and JavaScript.
Couldn't you just add a simple less class of your own that just mixed in those 3 properties for yourself?
You can. I tried that with some grid stuff, not using Bootstrap, but using the Blueprint less framework. And yeah, it does kind of work, but then you end up with
More CSS.
yeah, more CSS. So it is a trade-off between less CSS and more classes, or more classes and less CSS. So I guess less CSS is probably what we're after here.
It's also handy when you hand it over to someone who's not as technical.
Yeah, they can understand that a lot easier. But you know, from a sort of purist semantic HTML, I don't want any presentational markup in my HTML kind of background. That is a little bit like fingernails down a blackboard, but it does the job, and you know, it does it quite well. And I'll show you in a bit something I've done with Bootcamp, although I suspect it's going to look awful because of the width of the screen. But anyway, we'll have a look at that in a sec. So let's go on. So I don't want to spend too much time going through here, but you kind of get the idea. Now they've released a new version of Bootcamp last week, and they've added the little sort of icon-y things around the input fields is one thing they've added. And this is another new thing they've just added, which is a few little classes for presenting images. So you can now do a circular image really easily, which will just add border radius to your image, and as these two do, and you've got a polarized style one there, so it's quite nice for sort of quickly putting a bit of something extra into your images without having to go into Photoshop and actually edit those images. And the last thing really, the last thing probably to look at is the icons. Now, Twitter have got an agreement with guys that made these glyph icons to use them in Basecamp. So normally these are not free for use, but if you're using Bootcamp,
Bootstrap.
This thing here, if you're using this, you can use these. Now the way they do these, God, somebody get me a beer. Actually, I'm alright. The way they've implemented these is kind of interesting. What they do is they put an empty I tag with a class on it to give you an icon, because in CSS HTML5 I is sort of undeprecated, but doesn't have any semantic meaning associated to it. So it's kind of a tag for adding. I can't remember how the W3C described it, but you know, this is kind of a valid use for it. Again, I probably would, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that, but the sort of default way is to stick it in an I tag, and that's that.
So can you use those if you're only using a small part of Bootstrap?
Yeah.
Could you use those as well?
Yeah.
For what license is Bootstrap?
I've got a feeling, but I can't remember. But I think it's an open source share-alike type.
Like GPL.
Is it GPL? Yeah. Okay. But the icons give you these sorts of things. You can use them in conjunction with buttons to get sort of WYSIWYG type button effects. And this is how you do it. So you've got, in fact, yeah, there we go. So we've got an I tag, which isn't empty. This, hang on.
It's the wrapping, it's
Yeah.
got a class on it.
Yeah, exactly. So icon right and left, which is so all of the icons have got an icon prefix to the class name, and that is your align left one, and similarly that's justify. So I'll show you. So you've got user and stuff like that. They've got black and white versions of the icons as well. So if you're using them on a dark background, you can use inverse version.
Are they done using a font, or is or the actual background?
No, they're actually
images?
background images. There is, I think, there is a font version of it available, but they're not implementing that at the moment. So there we go. So that's sort of the base CSS stuff. So most of the stuff in the sort of base CSS is for sort of individual elements, and then when you come on to what they call components, these are kind of putting more than one element together to give you a theme. For example, you've got a number of items here in a list with some styling on to give you a separated drop-down list. That's not a great example. There's some button lists further down here. We'll just go to those. Button drop-downs. No. We see button lists, progress bars, labels and badges. There's loads of stuff in there, and you can see that there are things like hero units, which are used quite a lot. Alerts, kind of handy. Progress bar. Yeah. So these are kind of, as I say, a collection of other elements that you can throw together quickly, and they've already done a lot of the work for you to give you something that looks quite nice quite quickly. So that's the sort of bulk of what's in Bootstrap, and then from there, they've got stuff to enhance that even further with JavaScript. So that will do stuff like modal overlays and button states. Scroll spying is quite nice. So as you scroll down the page, it watches to see where you are and shows you in the navigation, which is quite handy. You've got carousels and type ahead. All that sort of stuff is in the framework ready to be used. And some of this, it's pretty handy stuff. So, how do we start to use it? So, first thing to do is to go to GitHub. There, click on the download zip button or clone, because if you click the download button from the root of the site, then you're not going to get the less, which you'll probably want. Then we're going to rename the extracted folder to assets. The next thing I did, because I'm lazy, is I went to there and grabbed an example HTML file so that we can start building straight from their example and not have to try and figure everything out. We can learn as we go along. You have to save the source file, obviously, the source of that file into somewhere where you've got your Bootstrap, and change some paths. I got caught out by this because I didn't realise that jQuery doesn't get downloaded with Bootstrap. So although all the JavaScript plugins in the library rely on jQuery, they don't actually give you jQuery. So you have to go and get that as well, or link to the CDN to get it. And then gasp in amazement when it just works. So let's have a quick look at some code. So here we go, here's an index.htm. This is, I should show you, that interesting, in fact you'll see it in a minute, but so this is one of the demonstration files from Bootstrap. I have had to change the assets path because they had it from the root of a web server, and had to change a couple of other parts in here as well to get it to work. Assets, this is what you get when you download Bootstrap, and it will be called something like Bootstrap 1.0. So you just call it assets because that's what you call an assets folder. And as you'll see, I have a ton of less files here, an absolute ton of them. In fact, there's a lot there. But when it's compiled in a minute, you'll see that in actual fact, we don't get that many CSS files out of it. So let's do that quickly and then I can show you what that looks like. And you'll be amazed. Except it's probably going to go into, right. Bootstrap 101. Okay, so this is untitled HTML. There it is, blah. That's not what I wanted. Files, Bootstrap. Okay, so in CodeKit we'll see that although all of the less files that are in the folder appear, only 2 of them are actually bold, the others are all sort of greyed out. If I click on something like utilities.less, you'll see that do not directly compile is ticked. So let's have a look at bootstrap.less, and that doesn't have that tick, which means that that's one of the files.
Where is CodeKit getting that information? Do the files have some kind of header that
No.
are implying that should happen?
No, I think what it is, although I haven't really looked into this in too much detail, but I believe what happens is if we look at bootstrap.less, you'll see that it imports reset.less.
Right.
So anything that's imported into another file doesn't get directly compiled. So you can see this is the reset file, variables, mixins, blah blah blah. All of the less files that are in here are getting imported into here, except these responsive ones down here because they get imported into the responsive less file, which we'll look at in a little while. But one thing it's worth pointing out at this stage is that when you come to actually deploy, you can probably remove a lot of these because you're not going to use all of those in your CSS that you want to deploy. So if you're not using popovers and tooltips and modals, you can get rid of that because you don't need those classes anyway. Okay, so let's let us compile Bootstrap.less, and we'll have a CSS file now. And with any luck, there we go. Right, it's all right. Okay, so this is one of the demo files that you get. This is what we would normally see at the top of the Bootstrap homepage, is something an awful lot like that, and you'll see that this looks like vanilla Bootstrap because that's what it is. So that's your first step towards developing with Bootstrap. What I'm going to show you now is a little project that I have worked on. Now this is a changed the company name, but and you can see actually this is designed to be wider, so this has gone into the responsive menu structure up there. It should have a few menu items here, but they'll all be there now because it's narrower than the page is expecting to be. But this was put together in about a day from that that file that we saw just now for a client of the agency that I'm working for at the moment. Basically, the guy came to me and said, look, we're going to see a client, they want a dashboard for health and safety stuff, and they want to show something to the board to kind of get buy-in for us to then go and develop that. Can you knock something up in Photoshop or something? I went, I'd rather build something in HTML that they can actually play with and get an idea of the sorts of things this might be able to do for them. And then, you know, hopefully they'll be, you know, more excited about it, and they'll want to go for it. So ordinarily, these buttons would be sitting up here, but as I say, the screen's a bit narrower, and this isn't a properly responsive design yet because it's only cobbled together in a day. So normally this would be wider and these buttons would be next to each other. But we've got a nice little autocomplete box down here. We've got buttons that appear when you mouse over, and they've got, you know, a little bit of a hint of some sort of functionality going on there that isn't really there, but you know, could be. We can go to list view on the